Thanks for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Engine, who's sitting beside me manning the keyboard, which is wonderful. I'm Josh Bodwell. I'm the editorial director of David R. Godine Publisher and Black Sparrow Press. And it is a total delight to say yes to two wonderful women that I could not say no to, Kerri Arsenault and Meredith Hall. So Kerri, the pride of Mexico, Maine, is a book critic, the book editor for Orion Magazine, and contributing editor at Literary Hub. And we're here tonight to talk in part about Kerri's debut, Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains. And Kerri and I were talking about this in the publishing world and in the reading world, that, you know, we're always saying we want something really fresh and really original, but do we really? And this is a book where if you mean that, this is what you're going to get. This is investigative expose, this is ethnographic reporting, this is memoir, all blended together, mixed and seasoned to perfection. Totally compelling read. And if you think you have a complex relationship with your hometown, you haven't seen anything.
Join me.
And joining Kerri in conversation is Meredith Hall. In 2007, Meredith's memoir, Without a Map, became, I think it's safe to say, beloved immediately, and also became a New York Times bestseller. Meredith's nonfiction has appeared in literary journals across the country, such as the Gettysburg Review, the Southern Review, and the New York Times, where her Modern Love column, I Gave Him Up at 16, Could We Try Again, continues to be one of the best columns there, continues to be read and anthologized. But tonight, Meredith is joining us as a debut novelist. Meredith's novel, which I have learned to say in a better way because of her, Beneficence. I was saying Beneficence, but Meredith, when you say Beneficence, that nef. Before I was lucky enough to become the acquiring editor of this book, I fell in love with it as a reader, hearing Meredith read some of this work aloud, alive. And you're all going to be falling under that spell tonight when you hear her read. So please join me clapping from your homes for Kerri Arsenault and Meredith Hall.
Clapping for Meredith.
And if you have questions, pop them up. I just got a note from my manager over here. Pop them up in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. All right, Kerri, Meredith, you have the floor.
Hi, hello everybody. Kerri, I think that we should start with you. Your book has come out, and I think you should hold it up and let everybody see this beautiful book.
Here it is, and it's Milltown, and this actually is the river, the shape of the river that runs through our town, which is the Androscoggin River.
Congratulations, this is a very exciting thing. This is a book that is combining forms in a very unlikely way. And I admire very much all of the various components that you've brought into this and your ability to interweave these forms that are challenging enough on their own. And I wonder if, to give us a start, a sense of the memoir voice that you're bringing to this, and we can talk later about these other voices, but the memoir voice. So I look at page 94. Mm-hmm. This is actually, I want to rephrase this. This is the section where you talk about drinking water, the simple act of lifting a glass of water and drinking it. And this is a beautiful example of the way in which your personal life tangles with the effects of living in a town with a significant mill, and a polluting mill, and also a mill that supports all of the families in two towns and the surrounding area. So I wonder if you'll read that just as an introduction to get us started.
It's a perfect introduction. Okay. By 1970, when I was 3, the Androscoggin's dissolved oxygen level was exactly 0. Newsweek named it one of the 10 filthiest rivers in the United States. Everything in the river died. When I graduated from high school in 1985, the EPA revealed its creatures contain some of the highest dioxin levels in the country. Don't eat the fish, we were always told, but we couldn't have anyway because we never saw any to catch. There were also no swimmers or boaters in the river that William B. Lapham once praised in his 1890 book, History of Rumford, noting the Androscoggin as beautiful and the scenery picturesque and often grand. If you squint, the Androscoggin still fits that description. But if you open your eyes, you'll see what was invisible to me my whole life. The mill's pollutants hovering low over the naturally formed glacial bowl of our valley, or in the toxic stew congregating in the riverbed. What I did notice when I was young was the rainbow-colored foam eddying on the river's edge, which was as enchanting as the gray mill snow, the gray mill snow that floated softly up from the smokestacks and down upon any surface in town. What did we all do? We plugged our noses and placed our drinking glasses upside down in the cupboard so ash wouldn't get in our milk. The pollution was as trapped as we were. I still gag every time I drink a glass of water, a reflex that emerged when I lived within a football field's reach of the mill and the Androscoggin. At the time, I sweetened our mephitic water, drinking water, with Tang or Xerox, or drank no water at all. But as an adult, the memory of our water's brackish and sweetish chemical smell taste, combined with the sour air above it, precipitates what feels like smothering when I put glass to lips. Dioxin, cadmium, benzene, lead, naphthalene, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, arsenic, furans, trichlorobenzene, chloroform, asbestos, mercury, phthalates. These are some of the byproducts of modern-day papermaking. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, lung cancer, prostate cancer, aplastic anemia, colon cancer, liver cancer, esophageal cancer, asbestosis, Ewing sarcoma, emphysema, cancer of the brain, cancer of the heart. These, I find out, are some of the illnesses appearing in our towns, occasionally in curious clusters, sometimes in generations of families, often in high percentages. There's a lag between exposure and diagnosis, experts declared. People could be exposed from other sources, scientists explained. There were uncertainties, decried environmental agencies. Continued follow-up is needed, said the mill. Meanwhile, people quit jobs or school to care for sick family members, lose health insurance because they lose their jobs, and put canisters on pizza shop countertops to pay for medical bills.
Wow. It's a devastating little section, and it's not even the introduction to your book. We've already traveled with you for a while in this town that is home to you. It was home to you. Those two lists are really devastating.
Yeah.
And very, very smart for you to dare to commit to such long lists, both of the toxins and then of the repercussions of living with those toxins. It's really impressive.
Well, it's interesting too, because I mean, how else to get that information in there without getting all scientific, you know, without, like Josh was saying, my book takes on things, writing about science without writing like a science writer, you know, trying to do that.
Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit? So it seems to me that what you're doing here, Josh had some lovely language about your investigative journalism and your ethnographic writing, but can you talk a little bit? It seems to me that this book really, in the end, is a book of research, even researching your own life, right? The memoir parts of it. So I wonder if you can talk about this. So it seems to me, at the very least, you have laid out and explained a kind of history of your own nuclear family. And you look back through employment at the mill and why people came into this town, why your family members came into this town to work at the mill. You go back in your family. You also actually research genealogy, including going to France and traveling around France. You research the history of the town, how the town was founded, and the nature of the town, kind of the economy and the political history of the town. You research the mills very, very thoroughly. So we really understand from the moment that the mills are are conceptualized.
Yeah, yeah.
And then incredibly, you research the science of the pollutants, the politics surrounding the pollutants, the legalities surrounding the pollutants, the economy, the economics surrounding them, and then the after effects, the health effects. And you did all of that in one book. That's really extraordinary. But
I
it
never
doesn't.
thought of it that way.
That's a really daunting task. I'm so impressed. Did you have any idea? So I guess I'm going to ask you two questions. Did you have any idea what you were taking on when you first thought you were going to imagine doing this? And the second thing is, can you talk about all of those various forms of research that you did?
Yeah, I never had anybody put it to me that way. I'm so terrified of what I just did. I had no idea. I mean, I started out with an obituary of my grandfather's that had some information that was incorrect. That's actually what I started out with. So to make a long story short, I wondered what else could be incorrect in the evidence of a life or our lives or this town. And it was also the same incorrect material was in his obituary. I mean, in his death certificate. Anyway, so the research really just emerged like naturally. Like I followed where my curiosity went, and I just kept going down the paths, and they just kept moving. There were different paths and then I followed the money, I followed my curiosity, I followed whatever something took me. So eventually the book took on the structure of the river itself, really, that movement of a river and just kind of going along forward, but like moving through these different lines. And also like life itself, and like me, if anybody here knows me, it's not a tidy way of doing things, but I sort of, yeah, I go off where I go off. I don't know. It's just, it really kind of is a map of my brain too, in a way, which is terrifying. And to my detriment or benefit, I can compartmentalize the emotional parts from the other things that need to get done, like the science and the research. I could really compartmentalize those in a way, but at some point they start coming together. I think, that river, like again, a river metaphor, they would go along, but sometimes they would cross, so that it was interesting, the research, the structure emerged through the research of the book itself, you know what I mean? Like it became like that family tree or a genogram or a cancer cell or a river, like all those little maps, those little tributaries going outward and everything. It wasn't a straight line. I mean, life's not a straight line, right? So
this story is not a straight line. It is a very, can you tell me, did you have any background in science, or did you have to master an understanding of some very, you do a wonderful job of delivering this science to the reader in a way that we can hang with it. There's a lot of detail, but it's very, very interesting and compelling reading. So I'm impressed with your ability to synthesize that information and then hand it to us so that we can, first of all, so that we can understand it, and secondly, so that we'll want to read it.
Well, I think like the way you storytell, I really felt like I was sitting down in front of my fireplace telling the story of my town. And that's how I wanted that voice. No matter what, if I was in the didactic mood or in this narrative mood, I just wanted to be like, this is how, so I wouldn't talk in a weird science language if I was sitting there talking to friends, And that's kind of what I did. And I had a lot of expert help. I mean, not a lot, friends that I met along the way on Twitter and in different forums, and scientists and chemists and epidemiologists that sort of, I would write something and I would, rewrite it in my form. I'd be like, is this right? And so that was really helpful. I mean, it was like a detective story, really. I mean, I think too, like, who hasn't read the book, it follows, it actually is a map of my research, this book itself, right? About identity, genealogy, family history, legacy, power, pollution, all those things you say, but it's really a research project.
Well, and it also seems to me that the essential truth is that you have lost people that you loved not in your family and also in your town, neighbors, a lot of people got sick and died, and probably continue to do that. And so it feels as if you start with a simple kind of inquiry about what is it about this town that seems to be killing people, and from that you
bigger than I ever imagined it would be.
Yes,
like
that's
more
just
complicated.
Yeah, that's just what it feels like, Kerri, that you thought that it feels as if it's possible that you thought, well, I'm just going to tell the story of this polluting agent in my town, but it gets very complicated, and it gets complicated in every way, emotionally more complicated, and scientifically more complicated. It's a very interesting, it's kind of a kernel, a starting point that suddenly starts to need to be unraveled in very deep ways.
Speaking of your book, you've been so kind to talk about my book, but first of all, I should tell everybody here, when I first encountered this, I think Josh sent it to me in March. I wrote him immediately and I said, this feels like a masterpiece, is what I said. I'm not kidding. I don't say that. I don't say that. But it was like, because it was,
thank you for saying it.
It was both small and big. Like it's about the Center family, this family in Maine, I should say that we have that connection here, and both of us have lived in Maine as children. I want to tell everybody who doesn't know. So your book was like big and small, and it was loving and sad and like blessed and severed. It was all these things going on at once, and I was like, that's what it was. It was like a book about the nut of the human condition, right? And speaking of Maine, that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about, because we had that in common about our landscape. But your landscape is like, I mean, I guess both of us, the landscapes really feel like they define the people that live within them, right? And your landscape of Maine undergirds this book in such a beautiful way. But I would love to hear, as does the landscape of grief, right? This book is about, there's big landscapes, real landscapes, and then, you know, spiritual landscapes. But those two landscapes feel really, they're moving it, like that's your river, right? Maine and the landscape of grief. And I'd love to hear you talk about how this couldn't have been written anyplace else but in Maine, and how Maine is central to defining these people.
Yes, these are people I know. They're people I understand, and they're people that I carry in my genes, I think. My family has been in Maine. They actually had to leave Maine from the Maritimes into Maine for a generation, and then down into the mills of Haverhill and Lawrence. So we have that connection.
Yeah, right.
But my family is from Maine, and I think that I think it's in us, you know. These are people that I know and love. That the farm, the Center farm, is a place that is so, it's so generous. It was one of those farms that by the late 40s had really fallen into a kind of lack of attention. Tup, the father and husband in this family, as a child, grew up with a father who did not love farming and was very overwhelmed by it. Even though he had several sons, he really did not like the work of farming and felt very trapped by it. And in fact, he saved money and chose Tup as the one child who would leave the farm and go to college and not come back. He wanted to buy Tup's way out of that.
Broke my heart, by the way.
Yes, and then in fact, his father dies, and Tup does return to the farm and takes it over with his new wife, Doris. And they discover there, they resuscitate this farm with so much love and such hard work. It's such hard work. They love that work. So I think there's something about Tup and Doris Center's love for the place and their willingness to commit themselves so entirely, both emotionally and physically, to it. And so the characters and the place, this farm, really become completely interwoven. They're inseparable from each other. And I also think the farm is a very beautiful place, and it's a very bountiful place. It supplies what they need as long as they do this hard work, put this work in. And I think that there's something about an understanding that they carry every day, a gratitude that they carry for this place, and the place gives back to them. It's such a reciprocal relationship, and I don't think,
sorry.
I don't think that the center family would be who they are without that place.
I was going to say, there's something in the book that happens that sort of breaks that integration with the landscape and with each other. And that's, I think I just realized that's why it feels so terrible, because like you said, they were one in the, they were together with this landscape, and what happens is that that's broken. So it feels even more severe than it would in a novel where something terrible would happen, but you just have it so, they're so closely paralleled.
Yes, I think that this family trusts both the love that they share within the family and their relationship to this land, what this land is for them. And when a very, very sad thing happens to this family, a tragedy hits them, and all the things that they had relied on, that love that was their glue within the family, and their relationship to the land, their joy, truly a joy every day in this land, it abandons them. They lose it. They lose their understanding, or lose their ability to lean on those two loves, really. And losing both of those things after this very sad event really throws them into a tailspin.
Especially, I feel like, especially the mother, the wife, I'll say, because she's not from this land. She moves to it as sort of she comes to it, and but she seems even more ferocious about it in a way than
she is. Yes, yeah, that's a wonderful word too. She is fiercely fiercely attached to this place, and tells us in several places early in the book, we are blessed people, and we know that. And she feels as if this is a place that protects the family, that there's a world outside. She tells us that we're an island here, and there's a world outside that is vaguely, in ways she can't name, threatening to her and threatening to this peace. And she finds in this place the security that she needs.
Speaking of threatening, well, as I'm reading along, and maybe you have I don't know what you're going to read from, but when I'm reading this book, you feel all this love and generosity, and you feel all this that we're talking about now, but there's also something very terrifying happening, and I don't know how you do it. I can't even find, there's like, I was like, is there a word she put in there that made me feel scared? But it would just be, I don't know, you would end on a sentence that would make me go, just intake a breath and go, oh my gosh, what's happened? There's something very dark or something burbling underneath your sentences, and I don't know how you do that.
So actually, Kerri, I chose a couple things that I might read tonight, and one of them might suggest some of that. And I wonder, it's actually a really nice segue into this. So
okay, do it.
This will be interesting. This is Doris speaking, the mother and wife, and she is reminiscing. All three of these characters, the book is told in three voices: Doris, Top, her husband, and one of the children, Dodie, has a voice, and they speak in a round. It's Doris and then Dodie and then Top throughout the book. And each of them they're all storytellers, and so they very frequently take us back, just in a way that you and I might, if we were sitting and talking, this happened once. And she is remembering something that happened when she was young. And it's she grew up in a town in Maine, not on a farm. Her father owned a store, and I think there is some of that suggestion of her waking up to the possibility of harm or tragedy coming. So that's a great segue. I'll read this section. Once, a year or so before I ever met Tup, my father and I closed the store as usual and walked home together for supper. But instead of turning in at our gate, he nudged my elbow and said, "Let's stay out a while longer. It's a nice night." It was nice, a cool late spring night, still lit pink in all the darkness. No stars were out yet, although it was clear. Colebrook was once a busy town, with the mills working 2 shifts and men and women going to or from work at all hours. But then the Depression ended all that. Those were hard years for everyone. I remember that night as a time of quiet, with the mills closed down or on reduced shifts, and absence of the old noise and hellos and good evenings on the sidewalks. The town was out of work, and men and women sat on their doorsteps smoking cigarettes, nodding seriously as we passed, while their children played in the side streets. My father was a silent man, a kind but formal man. We worked together every day in his store, Canton's Grocery, which he had built up enough that he was able to stay open through those hard times. He sold groceries and meat and was known as a good butcher. Women in the neighborhood came every day to buy their food from Jack Canton. He never said more to his customers than he did to me or my mother, but people liked and trusted him. You could see that. I must have been about 15 that night. He asked me to walk with him. I remember feeling scared. I had never known my father to deviate from his routine, and I felt off balance. Even then, I did not like surprises. We walked elbow to elbow in silence up Jackson Street and across to Governor. Every house had its lights on by then, and the families had all gone indoors for supper, whatever it might be in those times. My father was a generous man and did what he could to help his neighbors, extending credit for basic necessities that might never get paid for. But we were beyond our own little world by then, walking streets I had no reason to be on. My father seemed to have no purpose, no intention in where we walked. And although I was young, and although he said almost nothing, I felt a deep sense of dread, as if he were opening a door onto possibilities that I must resist. And then I sensed that he was crying, silently, the way he did everything. I felt his grief, whatever it was, draw me to him like a gentle but insistent arm. He did not raise his hand to wipe his tears. They flowed down his narrow, tired face, dripping off his jaw and his chin. We walked from pool of light to pool of pale light, away from home. I had a great need to know what this terrible sadness was my father carried, and a great need to never know its name, a sort of superstitious belief that if we did not speak its name out loud, it would never come to find me. I could not imagine what could cause my father such sorrow. Was it simply a loneliness from all that gentle silence? Did he wake up that morning unable to justify the path his small life had taken? But isn't every life small, I wondered, and a gift in its everyday inconsequence? Was this about love? I felt a stab. Did my father long for something more than my mother's steady and practical love? Had he glimpsed something in the store that day? A look or a laugh or a sigh, a small comment about how lovely the springtime air feels on your face, something that reminded him of another life he had once imagined, of something lost forever. Each possibility frightened me. Why did he need me to walk beside him while he let his swelling current pass? Would I ever feel such an awful loneliness in my own life? He never changed his pace. When we got to the bottom of High Street, we turned together back toward home, where my mother waited for her husband and her daughter. The porch light was on, an inquiry into where we had been. My father took out his handkerchief and blew his nose, folded it carefully, and nodded for me to go ahead of him through the door to our family supper.
Yeah, exactly. You know what, it was interesting hearing you read that. It made me think of a few things. One is that you were reading that passage, and it actually could have been a passage in my book, like
Yes.
current modern day. I love, like, or my childhood, which was in the 60s or 70s,
Yeah.
80s even.
Yes.
Because Maine is just like this place that is so constant and really slow to change in so many ways.
Slow to change, and I think the mill life and the farm life and these lives took place shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure there were farms right outside Mexico, Maine, and these this farm that Doris Center ends up living on is very close to this town she grew up in, where people are out of work because the mills are down. So it's these lives, I think, were much more familiar to each other than we might imagine that rural and that mill town life.
And familiar to me, like really familiar. Like that, there was one scene where you talk about them. It was a snow day for school, and I just remember that excitement, and then just in the way you described the snow and going, it was thick and heavy. I can't remember how you said it, but in everybody going out for sleds and the parents taking sort of the morning off, and I don't know, that was just really lovely. And it just, I could have put that in my own book.
Could I ask you something, actually, Kerri? One of the things that impresses me about your book is you are writing about devastating truths. These mills killed people. They are killing people, and you convince us of how they're doing that. We come to understand exactly what is going wrong. But you also have written a book that is very nostalgic, and your sense of having grown up in a rare place and time that allowed you that kind of the freedom of the mid-century child to roam town safely, and all the neighbors knew where all the kids were all the time, and your sense, I think most importantly, your profound sense of belonging in that community. You were a child of that community. It was your home. And so I wonder if you can talk about the kind of collision that happens in this book between the love for this town and the gratitude, really, that you had that kind of childhood, and then the very hard fact that what provided that life for you and many, 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 thousands of other families often actually killed them too.
I think the book was really, in the larger sense, an examination of that nostalgia / American dream, right? I mean, when I first started thinking about this in a different way, I loved what the town was, or what, not for what it was, but what I thought it was, right? I mean, I did have all those great, happy experiences, but like I said, at the same time, I was being poisoned. Like, how can those two things coincide at the same time, as were everybody in town? There was really nightmarish things happening. So it was like the American dream. I really wanted to look at that because I felt like that was such a myth, and that's part of the nostalgia, right? I wanted to look at that American dream and figure out, did we have it better, or do we have it better now? And what does that mean? Like, and I mean, the answer is no. I mean, in a way, we did have these things, but for my parents, maybe it was that certain generation we had it, but for my parents and their parents, the mill was it was kind of a colonial operation, really, up until the EPA existed. I mean, there were no labor laws, there was no FDA. Humans like my father even, were recycling units for industry. Acadians were exploited. But there was that, no OSHA, but there was that tacit.
And also, Kerri, you make very clear that even with OSHA and
doesn't matter.
It didn't matter. The mills still got what they wanted.
Yeah, and that's the conundrum that I faced constantly. And in writing about that, I had to look at it from an insider and an outsider, and that constant, and really a friend of mine who helped edit the book, other than my editor, when he looked at the plot of my book, he took it apart and he said, he put all the plot, and it was like 3 pages long. And he's like, here's what you do. You go home and you go back, and you go home, and you go back, and you go home. So that recursive movement, right, was like kind of underlining this perspective of insider, outsider, and advocate and critic, a witness and a participant. And that's really how I started looking at this looking at all these topics, the history, my family, the town, the pollution, was like just from those two perspectives. And, you know, once you stand up back from something or you leave a place, you can see it more clearly. I mean, you're close up, you see it clearly, but in a different way.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that you do a wonderful job actually of allowing us to participate, really participate as readers in the love that you felt for home, everything about home, but also this profound sense of betrayal as an outsider looking at everything with a different perspective and with maturity. There is such a sense of outrage in this book. This is in many ways, the thread of love and the thread of outrage is really, it's a braid. It's all braided together.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, think about that. If you look at something you thought was so perfect or whatever, and then, you know, it's maddening. And it's also a real huge sense of loss, not to mention the lives lost, but just the sense of that loss. And it's interesting to, you know, there's a lot of people in my town are reading this book, and a lot of them have opinions. Most of them are really interesting and supportive. And there's a few people who are like, well, I prefer to remember our town this way, which I find really fascinating thing to say. If you prefer to remember it this way, you're actually choosing to just really you're ignoring what's happened and what is currently happening. Like you said, it's still happening. So it's not really about the past. Even though I write about this childhood, it's really about the present day, you know.
And politically, there is such a desire to move back to the 50s and the 60s when life was wonderful and life was good, and we'll get the mills working again, and we'll all be able to return to that life when people were well employed. And they were, in fact, that is absolutely true, that people were well employed, but at such terrible cost. And I think an awful lot of people either don't realize those costs or don't want to contend with them.
I think that's true. And then also there's something that did happen at the turn of the century when those people are all, you know, our paper mill started in like 1901 or 2, they started making paper. But the upward mobility of the early 20th century was structural, and it was everybody moved upward en masse. It wasn't people weren't moving from one class to another. Everybody was doing well. Right. So then that quickly though became, you know, started to divide, you know, when, you know, the working class and the owners of the mill, for instance. But that was, so it was an imaginary, so people, yes, were doing well, but everybody was doing well. So
my mother was born in 1920, and her mother was a single mother, which was quite unusual. They lived in Haverhill, and I remember in the 50s and 60s, my grandmother being filled with pride that she earned enough money all those years to support them comfortably. They were working class, but they had what they needed. And that was as a single woman. She, you know, in a strange way, the mill allowed my grandmother employment that she would not have found in a community that did not have the mills. The mills allowed a kind of an equalizing of or an opportunity for women to enter the workforce. So there are all of these strange confusions about this. You know, there is one truth, and then there's another truth. So.
Yeah, right. And my grandmother and great grandmother, I think, worked in the bag factory. So they were also employed. Back to your book a little bit. There's something you said when you were reading about, or maybe you talked about it, now I can't remember because my memory is so bad. But I was thinking about how your book contains these silences in them, things that, and this is, I'm connecting to this because this happened in my family too, and in our town, silences about things that go unsaid in families. There were other gaps, and I said to you earlier that even in your sentences, I don't know how you do it again, you build silences in them. And you chose, you did this thing where you rotated the narrators, Doris and Dodie and Tup, but you chose to eliminate a couple of the characters from their own sort of voicelessness. So that's another silence. And I wondered why this choice? Why did you do that?
It's a very interesting comment for me. I'm not sure that I consciously made a decision about it. I did make the decision that Beston is the youngest child, and he has no voice in this book. His sister Dodie reports for him. She reports him to us a lot. She shares this child. She actually comes to feel in many ways that she is forced into mothering this child. And although she resents that, she does it very lovingly. And she attends to him the way a mother does to a child. She thinks he's pretty wonderful. And she explains him to us in a lot of ways, but he does not talk to us. He does not have a voice. Yeah. And there's another silence too. Doris becomes really, in many ways, paralyzed by grief that she experiences. And she becomes very silent and very, very isolated, profoundly isolated. And she and Top lose their very deep intimacy. They are a very intimate couple, and they lose that. They can't talk to each other. They don't touch each other. They don't understand the experience of grief that they're each feeling. And so I think that the silence does play in this. But
it's really deployed well, though. I think without it, I mean, there's a quietness to your book too, which is a little bit separate from the silence, you know, the quietness. It's like so I'm going to move to the quietness of it. So the silence is like, it feels like purposeful so that we can sort of either invent or wonder or be heartbroken about some of those silences. Like when Doris goes silent, it's really, it's like excruciating to see what happens to their relationship. But there's also this understatedness about the story. And I was talking to Josh actually earlier today about these kind of stories where novels like yours and books like mine, we're talking about like kind of small thing, might be the human condition, but we're talking about these smaller stories. We're not talking about Chernobyl in my case, and you're not in like doing some dramatic movement of sorts. You're in the small towns.
These are family events, right?
Family events. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wonder if you thought about that as you were writing it. Was it purposeful? Like, were you thinking of that? I mean, I know I was thinking about like sort of taking storytelling itself and shaking it up a little and trying to say like, how could this small story how can I make it urgent? Or how can I make people care about it? Mm-hmm. So I wondered if you too thought about that.
Well, I think that I went into this writing very interested in, I really wanted to kind of do an inquiry into the watching a family that functions very well. They're a good family. They have figured it out. They happen to, they each married people that they genuinely like and love and need and trust. And they have these 3 children, and their life on the farm is good. And I was very interested in what would happen when a large enough event came into their lives that it shook all of that up. They
outside force too.
Yes, an outside event. And I was very interested in watching. I really didn't know what would happen, you know. I went into it with a curiosity, you know, wanting to know that. But I wonder, Kerri, I'm watching our clock. I wonder if I can ask you, it's a good time to ask you to read another piece that I think is very beautiful. And this really is, this is memoir, and it's a very beautiful section. It's on page 136. And it's about your father. And it seems to me that this loss underlies the impetus of your whole book.
I'll talk about that in a minute, briefly. So back and forth I drive 5 or 6 hours each way from Connecticut to Maine. One trip blends into the other until I can't tell what month or even what year it is. April 5th, Maine is buried in snow. April 20th, there's not a white flake in sight. Slowly, my father begins to eat. All he wants is pistachios, so I buy bags of them. They're too expensive for me, he says, gobbling them up. We talk about baseball and books. He reads The Art of Fielding, and we forget to talk about it. We watch movies, we sit around. He always loathes just sitting around, as do I. Once an outstanding athlete, he was known for being able to do a tip roll at the 8th tower of Black Mountain's Maine Trail when someone would shout, "Alley-oop," from the T-bar. He'd plant his 2 poles downhill and spin on them, and the tips of his skis in a pirouette, then continue down the hill as if nothing happened. Now he struggles to lift a knee. He starts physical therapy. I watch his slow march to nowhere. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. By spring, he rolls his wheelchair into the driveway to bask in the yawning sun. Late summer 2014, I kiss my father hello, and after a few minutes, he turns to the TV. My mother shouts something from the kitchen over the clamorous rattle of the TV show Pawn Stars. I slump in the overstuffed chair. I learn the new routine of their lives. My mother empties my father's catheter, changes his cannula, washes dishes, makes coffee, turns the heat up, turns the heat down, helps him to bed, tucks him in. One day, the oxygen man who delivers fresh canisters, a nurse, their handyman, and a parade of strangers and friends amass then disperse like a dandelion gone to seed in a quick wind. In the room where I used to sleep, big liquid oxygen tanks with their constant threat of blowing us up to smithereens at the accidental drop of a match. In the morning, my mother walks my father to the kitchen, her arms wrapped around his waist. I hear them murmuring in the hallway. "Ain't much of a life," he says. "What's the matter?" my mother says, slightly alarmed. "I feel like shit," he says. "Just couldn't sleep." My mother procures a voice-activated phone, a walker, the best hearing aids, a hospital bed, bathtub rails, hospice aids, ice cream, Netflix. The days drift. Dinner comes early. The late afternoon winter light hesitates, then crashes, darkening the curtained room. We fold ourselves into the furniture and flip channels. Do you or anyone that you know suffer from lung cancer? Give us a call at the lawyer on the TV beckons. Maybe I'll call, my mother suggests. What the hell are you talking about? My father says. Your lung cancer. Maybe I'll call them about your lung cancer, she says. I don't have lung cancer, he says. My mother tracks his oxygen levels like volunteers have done on the Androscoggin River, judging impairment by percentages, keeping the lower numbers at bay by turning up the O2. The river's oxygen percentages lie somewhere between impaired and threatened, as do my father's. My father's body seems to be a recycling unit for the toxicants that stream through his blood, but he, unlike the river, would never breathe again without a machine to help him, like the bubblers the rivermaster Lawrence had long ago installed. When I get better, he says as he hunches over, I'll visit your new house. His oxygen tank hisses away in the other room, its plastic line leashing him to his chair. As he keeps trying to live, he keeps dying at the same exponential rate as the town, an unbuilding of a body that had previously built a ski area.
Oh. Kerri, it's a devastating passage. The image of your old bedroom being filled with these oxygen tanks really seems to tell the story. This is that collision. Yeah, the collision of the childhood and the reality. I'm also struck, we were talking about silences. This is a man who absolutely refuses to talk about and acknowledge what's going on in his body.
He didn't want to know.
He didn't.
I kind of think I appreciate that a little. It's like he just wanted to live instead of worrying about dying. Do you know what I mean? There's something kind of good about that. I'm taking a note on that. As for the impetus of the book, no, this happened in the middle of me writing the book. He got sick and died in the middle of writing this book.
I had misunderstood that. I thought that it actually was, that this was the memory of an event that triggered the book. I didn't know that, Kerri.
Yeah, here's what happened. Like how I wrote it, and it's sometimes hard to tell, but it's all takes place in present tense from 2009 to 2019. Mm-hmm. Except for when I go back to events like when my trip to France or to Prince Edward Island. This was a present day event. I mean, I wasn't literally writing it real time. I mean, things would happen, I would take notes and then I would write it, kind of. But I was in the middle of grad school when this happened. So I was going back and forth to New York to Connecticut to,
So So you were in the middle, you had already made the decision to write this book, and then here comes the devastating kind of the uber evidence, right? The extreme evidence of exactly what it is that you're writing about. As you were reading it, I was struck with the fact that this has happened in families throughout these mill towns again and again and again and again and again. The suffering is exactly to this degree in every one of those families, with
every family,
the common cause going back to the mills.
Yeah, and I just started I'll be brief because I want to get back to a little bit of your book. I just started a cancer yearbook on my website to try to document. Instead of looking at scientific reports, I wanted to put data. I wanted to put faces to the data. And so I started this cancer yearbook, and people in my town are contributing like pictures of themselves that look like a yearbook photo, just like a headshot, with their diagnosis, or if they're witnessing for somebody else. They're like my father. I put my father's, what happened to him. And that just started a couple days ago, and I'm hoping to get like thousands, because there's your evidence. There's something.
There it is, right? And people can feel uncomfortable with your book or not, but there is the evidence.
And here's people's faces. Like, you can't deny that these people are sick.
Time is running for us, but I do want to make a quick mention. I found out today that the photographs in this book are your photographs, and I just think they are spectacular photographs. I'm so struck with how much I especially love the faces, and I realize these people trusted you. They allowed themselves to be seen in a way that only somebody who is of them would be able to. They're really moving.
No, I think
they're so ordinary.
They're so ordinary, and it's funny because you're writing about these same people, so of course you're gonna like see them in your center family too. But and somebody asked me like how I'm from there, like you said, and I haven't read a story like this, very a sort of memoir, narrative nonfiction about the working class, somebody in the working class writing it. That was another kind of absent thing. I haven't read that story yet.
You're not a scholar looking back.
Right. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a journalist. I can't believe that time went so fast. That's crazy.
Yes, I know that. This has been wonderful. Hi, Josh.
Hey, I was just nudging folks with last chance for questions, and Chad Whiteneck has a great question for you, Kerri. Building on what you were just talking about, how far does the toxicity extend from the epicenter of the mill? Were you able to dig into that at all?
Nope, but I can say, I know it goes to the Atlantic Ocean, and I know it goes into the fish, and I know it goes into the lobster, and I know people eat it, and then it goes into your body. So toxics are not provincial. They don't stay where we put them, as evidenced by the wildfires, right? You even think about that, by the way, which contain loads of dioxins, because buildings are burning. But that's the thing. In one of my chapters, I have people trying to catch the air in buckets. They call the bucket brigade. They would literally try to catch the air and send it to some lab in California and get the toxics measured, upwind, downwind. So if you can think about catching air in a bucket, that's basically what researching, basically like finding out any information was like for me. Catching air in a bucket. It's such a great metaphor. It's like impossible. How do you even do that? It's like, here's a glass, you go.
So the same thing, it doesn't have to be a final point. You two can make the final point. But it was dawning me as both of you were talking and drilling down into very specific aspects of both of your books. And I'm sitting here listening to you from inside an old textile mill in Biddeford that I live in. And on the site next to us for a long time was Merck, the trash incinerator, where they did the same thing, Kerri. They were trying to, scrape things off that were falling on cars on Main Street into buckets to send off. So it was dawning on me that your mill town could be this mill town. And in fact, we had wanted to do this downtown in Biddeford when we first talked about it. And Meredith's story and the intimacy and specificity of this family is also so universal. That's what's so powerful, I think, about both of these books, is that the empathy and compassion that you two have as writers allows us into these worlds and to imagine our own lives in the worlds that you've created. And it's, for something to be both specific and universal, that's the art you two have pulled off.
That's what I wanted to say about Meredith. It's true, right? That love and empathy, and that I think that's what just draws you to these characters more so than I've ever seen in any novel. I can't even think. I don't know. You heard her writing, and it's simple, but it's weighted and it's full of empathy and love. You know,
these people, they are, you know, they're good people, and they stumble hard, but they are very, very good people, and they're ordinary people. I think, you know, I write characters that I believe in and know, and those people are people. We are people who seek a kind of state of beneficence. You know, I think that this is something that we recognize and long for, and we understand that we have the capacity for this. So there are times in our lives when we actually are able to express that kind of love and compassion on a daily basis. And then sometimes when we are pressed so hard by events that we have to relearn that, we have to earn our way back to it.
That's exactly what my book's about. Thank you. No, it is. I mean, God, that was really true. I mean, that's what we're searching for there.
And to this moment we're in, that's what we all do every day right now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Earn our way back every day right now.
I'm going to respond to Chad's question about
okay, go ahead.
study again very briefly. There were some studies done. I think it was in the early 90s or late 80s, but there's no ongoing studies. I mean, you know, the toxics that are released from the mill are available on the toxic release inventory, which is on the EPA website. And you can see how much toxics are put into the air each year. And in 2018, I think it was over 2 million pounds. That's just 2018. And that's just one mill in one town. So that's not monitored at all. It's self-monitored by the mills. So that's one thing. And so there's no real, you know, it seems like the EPA should be out studying and doing that. It's not being done. None of that's being done, especially with the EPA being so gutted. I haven't, no corporate voices are related to executives who have written on the negative impacts of the mill. Nope. No, I did talk to a few people. Yeah, it would be nice. That would be nice. But I've talked to a few people that have worked there that sort of admit to things, but that's about as far as it goes, you know.
Well, gosh, can we end on a different note? Meredith.
Yeah, Meredith, say something beautiful.
I know you've got it.
I know. I'm such a Debbie Downer.
Let's go. Where's that up?
So we need to talk about, you know, this kind of, this, you know, the word is so overused, but redemption, right? We want to move towards redemption. And I think that the centers finally figure out, they make their way there. There's a lot of cost to that. You know, I think that there is a cost to loss anyway. It costs us, it changes us. But I also think that that very act of earning our way back into that state of goodness, that state of beneficence, it's the cost. The cost is rewarded. We are in the end larger for that effort. So I think right now all of us are feeling extremely pressed, and a good read is a wonderful thing to have right now. And I think that this, you know, Kerri is talking about a new way of thinking about the ways in which we make a living and the ways in which we make community. And the centers are earning their way back to some kind of calm and beneficence. So I believe in that. And I think this is a good time to have that faith. So
yeah, that's great. And vote. You should say that in your book is available for pre-order, we should say too.
Yes, thank you, Kerri. Yes,
yeah,
it is.
Posted in the chats, we posted links for anyone that wants to pop over to both Milltown and Beneficence, and can click your way through to the book. And I'll say to everyone watching now and to everyone that watches in the future, I'll offer a money back guarantee on these books.
Ditto.
So 20 years from now, you know, some horrible person's going to tell me they want their money back, and I'll pay up.
You're like the L.L. Bean of editors.
That's right. I dare you to not like this book, these books.
Kerri, that was really a pleasure. I think both of us have had a kind of interesting walk into recognizing how much is shared in these books. You know, it's this idea that the mill town and the farm are physically so close to each other, and the lives of these people, farmers and mill people, are in the same family. Every family has the farmers and the mill people. So this has really been an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it makes me look
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I loved it. I wish you had been my writing teacher too. Although I had some really good ones.
Yes, obviously you did.
Good catch, Kerri.
Yeah, they're not on here, but they may see this. In fact, my book is dedicated to him, so.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you both so much for such a beautiful evening and such a wonderful conversation, and evidence that we can talk about this hard stuff, and that it is good and cathartic and moves us toward that redemption, no matter how circuitous that river is on the way there. So thank you both so much. Have a lovely weekend if you can, and take good care. Be safe, be well.
Thank you, John.
Nice
Thank you, Kerri.
to meet
That
you.
was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh and Tammy.
Thank you, Tammy.
See you.